number. We have the same method, same questionnaire being used in Africa, about 11 or 12 countries. Same methods being used in places like Paraguay and so on in Latin America, right? So we can compare. But the important point is that while our number of countries is small, we got about 1/3 of the world's population in this group. India 1.2 billion, Pakistan close to 200 million, and so on, right? So we are then able to answer questions about what is affordable and things like that. And we do have a focus on disabilities these days. So there's quite a lot of research that we are doing on how to use assistive technologies to help people be more independent, right? Independent living is the objective. Let's see. So examples of wins. India Universal Service Policy. Universal Service Policy, I think, to explain to you what Universal Service Policy is. In all other countries other than Sri Lanka, there are some reasons why we don't do that. What happens is that the government takes, say, in India is the worst case, 5% of the gross adjusted revenue of the company, not profits, 5% of the revenue of the company as a universal service levy. So the idea is that they will take this money and they will spend it to help the poor. They will spend it for the rural areas, to connect the people who would not be connected by the market. In actual fact, India is sitting on about 11 billion US dollars that they have so collected and not given out, right? So that is not a very productive thing to do, because if they don't collect it, you could say that that money would have gone into more rollout or something, yeah? So originally back in 2005, 2007, thereabouts, they had structured it in a way that only the government-owned company would get it. So they were saying, you have to go to rural areas, this money is for rural areas, but you have to already be in the rural areas. That was the rule that they had. You have to already be there. So if you're new, and you're a new company, a competitive private company, and you're not there, you are not eligible. So they have a very transparent process, but the qualification took out everybody but the government company, except what we used to call BSNL, well, Department of Telecommunications, Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited. So we made this very strong argument based on our evidence that this was counterproductive, and that is one reason why they were spending too much money and not getting enough results. So they changed their rules. So we call that a win. Myanmar Universal Service Policy, we've been doing a lot of work in Myanmar, used to be called Burma. There, for example, we gave a lot of reasons how to avoid this kind of problem. And we also said they should allocate some money, if they are doing it, they should allocate some money for the disabled, because that's a group that would not be connected using market forces, and they did. Let's see, let's go to our case. That was a big win, but of course it didn't last. In about 2007, I got a call from somebody on the opposition benches saying that they were going to put a 50 rupees tax on every SIM card, 50 rupees a month, right? So I said, that's really stupid, right? Can't remember who it was, some opposition guy called me. So I said, you understand that's very regressive. What do you mean? Regressive means that it hits the poor more than the rich. That's what regressive means, regressive taxation. It's a technical term. So I said, most people spend about 200 rupees, 300 rupees a month. That's what the bill is. So if you take 50 from that person, that's a big amount. But if you take 50 from me, I might be spending maybe 5,000, that's a small amount. That is what regressive means. So I said, don't do this. They said, no, it's before Parliament. So we went hard at it. Being a former regulator and all that, I was able to get on the evening news. So in about 4 working days, we actually changed it, because I didn't know the minister at that time. I didn't know him. Mr. Raufa came. So he got hold of my phone number and he called me because of something I had written about this. So he said, what to do about this? I'm somewhat convinced by what you're saying. Because they didn't know, because you see, parliamentarians don't pay their telephone bills. That's the number one point. They don't pay their bills, they don't know how much they're spending. Right? It's like, trying to arrange airport transportation. I keep telling them, have a better system for normal people to get a taxi from the airport. They don't understand because they never experienced this problem. Right? So they didn't know that people were spending this little. Right? So once I showed them the data that people were actually spending small amounts of money, then he was convinced. This had come from Finance Ministry, but Minister Hakim, who was the telecom minister, he was convinced. Now remember, I have never met this guy before. I mean, he knew who I was, but I'm actually in Anuradhapura or something, and I'm talking on the phone to him. So at one point he tells me, shall I put it on the postpaid? So I know the data. So I said, yeah, you could try that. Then he calls me back and he says, Rohan, that is a joke, right? Because there are so few people doing postpaid that you can't get the amount of money from postpaid, right? I said, yeah, but I'm against the tax to start with. So he said, no, I have to give finance something. Now they want the money. There's a tension between telecom and finance. I have to give them the money. I have to make a constructive proposal. So I said, well, take the regressiveness out. You take the regressiveness out, you have to do a percentage. So if you're spending 200 rupees, let's say 10%, that was the final number they came up with, then you're paying 20 rupees. Now that fellow like me who was paying 5,000, now I'm paying 10%, 50 rupees, 500 rupees. So that is not unfair, right? The government still gets its money, still the tax is a bad idea, but at least it's not regressive, right? So we are applying economic theory and factual information to get a solution that was better for the low-income people than for the rich. So I said, I actually showed the numbers and I said, through my advocacy, I'm harming myself. Because my taxes, which could have been 50, now are 500. Right? I am harming myself. I'm harming my friends. I'm harming my family. But that's not the point. The point is that we should have reasonable public policies based on evidence. So that was the Sri Lankan case. We now have some other interesting stories. The government in India, particularly as they come up to the election, they want to say that a whole lot of people are on the internet. And we actually have shown that it's much less than that. So we are having some arguments on that. We haven't won that one, but it's interesting. So we have not stuck to this old style telecom stuff. We have moved on to other things. So for example, agriculture, disaster risk reduction. After the tsunami, we worked with a lot of tsunami affected villages trying to look at how they could evacuate faster, how early warning systems could be deployed and things like that, right? So today our focus, so this is all just history, right? So I'm moving on to data, which is what should interest you. So we are interested in looking at how big data can be used, data analytics. So the questions are, in addition to that, we are looking not only at the purely sort of technical questions, but at what would be called the ethics questions. How do we do good things without violating privacy? How do we do our work, and I'll give you some examples, without marginalizing people? I know you're the wrong age for Star Trek, but I am unfortunately of the kind of people who used to watch Star Trek. But this whole idea of masking, right? That vehicles, spacecraft, or even warcraft of even today, stealth fighters, things that don't give signals, they are not visible, therefore they are not responded to, right? So this whole idea that if we are looking at data, we should also look at where the silencers are. That people who don't communicate, I'll give you some examples as we go, they might get ignored completely, right? So that's the marginalization issue. Competition issues. Many people think I'm an engineer, but I'm not. I'm mostly an economist. So in economics terms, we really look at competition issues as a very important issue, because as you see, we have improved the ICT connectivity that you all enjoy, not because we kept a monopoly company and we ordered them to do good things and we gave them the resources to do good things and we invested through them, but because we broke the monopoly and we created competition, we have even caused the former monopoly to behave better, right? So, so we are always looking at competitive issues. So that's the focus of what I'm going to talk to you about, the big data stuff that we are working on with data search. And I think I saw Professor Pereira here, Amal somewhere here, Shehan. We are working with people from this department on these data analytics issues, right? So in 2012, what happened was that I had been working on these issues on the social science side of it, competition, privacy, things like that, in the 90s when I was teaching in the United States. Except those days, data analytics was being done. Data analytics didn't start now. Data analytics was being done those days. The only issue was that you needed supercomputers to do data analytics. They couldn't handle the requirements with ordinary computers. So I used to know how many supercomputers were sold to whom and so on, because the brand was Cray, C-R-A-Y. I don't think it's in business anymore, right? And the biggest customers were National Security Agency. Anybody heard of the National Security Agency? Anybody heard of Edward Snowden? Yes? Right. So he was a contractor for the National Security Agency. Many people in the world have heard of the CIA, but the National Security Agency has got a budget about 50 times that of the CIA. And all they do is signals intelligence. So the most advanced computer science in the world, perhaps, is done inside that organization, which is in a place called Fort Meade. I was so curious about it that I actually went and drove around it. I thought I'll get arrested that day. But anyway, high security, really high security stuff, right? So they used to buy supercomputers and they used to do the analytics. You know what a zottabyte is? You don't know what a zottabyte is? Z-O-T-T-A. So we know megabyte, right? We keep going. This is like unbelievably large. So just before the Snowden story broke, I still have that habit of looking at this stuff. They had got a new facility in the state of Utah. The NSA had got a new facility in the state of Utah because the electricity was cheap there, because they were going to put a data center. And I was saying, what on earth are they going to put? And the capacity was this zottabyte, right? Z-O-T-T-A-B-I-T-E, huge amount, right? To find that this was to store people's telephone calls, right? Call records. So call records in a small country like Sri Lanka, we do 100 million a day. 100 million separate records a day in this country. So can you imagine United States, which has got a population of about 300 million, we have 20 million, right? Can you imagine how many records there would be in a day? And they are not collecting only US data, they are collecting all the international data as well. Not all, quite a lot of international data as well. So that is why they have to have this enormous storage facilities, right? So anyway, this is sort of the serendipity of it. So I have been doing this. I had published in this area. in the 90s. And then when I was invited to come back to Sri Lanka, I thought, okay, I don't have to do this, can't do this stuff from Sri Lanka, I'll do something else. So I changed my research focus to looking at telecom reforms. And then I went for a WSO2 event in 2011 or 12. And an IBM fellow called Mohan said, you know, look at the trends, and we think this is going to be one of the big trends, big data. So I know this stuff, right? 10 years ago, I gave up research in this area, but I know this stuff. And he was saying, now it has been democratized. We have memory economics, the costs of memory have changed. The open source tools for analyzing it are there. It can be done by a much larger number of people. So I came back. I luckily had a guy who had a computer science degree from MIT, who I had then got onto another track, and he had got a public policy master's called Sri Ganesh Lokanathan. Some of you may know him. He's working very closely with data search and so on. So I persuaded Sri Ganesh that we should get started on big data for public purposes. These were the questions that we were interested in. How to make Colombo more livable. That was my interest. I live in Colombo. How to handle the traffic, right? More than just building roads, how to use information technology to handle the traffic. Diseases, we had an interest in that. And this other question, which I'll give you some examples about, are SDGs. There you go. You're also doing SDGs. There's SDG connection here. So we took a hell of a risk. I mean, I think it's perhaps the biggest risk I've taken as a researcher by getting into data analytics in 2012. So we didn't know, I mean, I had a policy in my organization that we don't buy desktop computers, right? But of course you can't do this stuff with desktop computers, with laptops, right? So we managed to lash together a stack of computers for $30,000, right? Very, very cheap. We don't do real-time analysis, only batch processing. So we can only work with historical data. But $30,000 is sort of nothing, right? And this was quite powerful. Now we have upgraded what we bought in 2012. Now we have upgraded. We are using these machines that people use for gaming and Bitcoin mining, right? That's what we are using now. So we were going to try to answer these questions. So I'll give you some examples. So we wanted to do it for public purposes, right? And what we have done over the last 6 years is our starting point was these call detail records, CDRs. That is, every time you make a call, the billing engine requires a record of that call so that you can be billed for it. Because we had a history of being a receiving party pays only country, we also collect for when the call comes in. So we know every call generates 2 records. Every SMS records is also a record. But we need 2. Who got it, who sent it, right? And there's a record made for internet searches, but only 1, not 2, right? Just you went out to the internet. So this is what adds up to 100 million. Why did we go for that? Because we were concerned about this issue of marginalization, of leaving some people out, right? So for example, I talked to the supermarket guys, I talked to Samurdhi, I talked to a number of people to see what kind of data had. Now Samurdhi, surprisingly, has got data, but it doesn't have that requirement of variability. So it's the same amount of money that goes into the Samurdhi bank to people's deposit. So some people get, I don't know, those days it was 200 rupees or something, maybe 500 or something, just 500 every month. Then when they take it out, there's not much variability. So to get really interesting insights, you have to have variability. They talk about volume, variability, and velocity. So velocity actually doesn't apply to what we do, because velocity means that the data is coming very fast, like from a big pipe, right? So we don't do the third V. but the first two V's are important to us. Variability is what gives you interesting insights. So supermarkets, yes, they are popular, but not everybody uses them. And generally, higher income people use supermarkets. In the old days, in addition to the National Security Agency, the early users, commercial users of data analytics were the credit card companies. American Express used to analyze your buying behavior in order to pitch new messages to people. Then they were doing anomaly detection, which is something you hear about if you get into data analytics. So I can remember once I was with my son in a shopping mall and I bought some sneakers for him, sports athletic shoes. Immediately I get a call from my credit card company saying, do you have your credit card in your possession? So I said, yeah, sure, I just bought something with it. Ah, okay. This was because it was a profile, right? Credit cards, when they're stolen, one of the first things that the kids who steal them do is buy sneakers, because this was, big Mike Jordan and Nikes, and this was the fashionable item. You buy this thing and then you throw it before you get caught, right? So they thought I had just been stolen. So I said, no, with my son, I bought this, right? So that is anomaly detection, looking at these patterns for fraud detection and so on, right? We talked to them. Again, Sri Lanka has got 1.4 million credit cards, population of 20 million, usually not the rich people, usually the people who have credit cards may be having 2 or 3, so it's not even 1 million people. So it doesn't cover the people we want to cover. So the only thing that covers the people we want to cover, which is datafied records, was this mobile call detail records. Now there's another set of data that the mobile companies generate, which is very interesting. That is called the visitor location registry data, which we are generating. Now I hope you're not making phone calls while I'm talking, but without any intervention on our part, our phones are generating VLRs. That is, it's telling the tower here that we are here, right? So we are not doing anything, it's machine-to-machine communication. So there's a lot of information there, but they don't actually move it out. They overwrite it on the tower. So for a short time, the VLR is there. So VLR is actually quite interesting, but we haven't quite figured out how to deal with that volume. It's a lot of information, right? So, but we started with that, but we are using satellite data, we are using electricity data, CCTV data. Some people here, your seniors, had got hold of CCTV data and done some thesis, some projects on that. They worked with us. So there's a lot of interesting stuff. And then we combine it with other data. We are looking at how they impact society, and we are giving it to government and other people to use, right? Going too slow, I think. Okay, some examples. So we look at, as I said, we look at, do we cover everybody? Do we exclude people? Because if we exclude people, we could be doing harm. Now this is where the ethics issue comes in, right? You try not to do harm. You always are trying to be aware of bias. So my argument is that all data is biased, all data, including what you see. Even if you're in court cases, we say the best evidence is eyewitness evidence, but it is established that even eyewitnesses don't actually get it right all the time, right? So what kind of bias is there? So we have various theoretical issues that we deal with it, which I don't want to get into. So as I said, supermarket data, Samurdhi data, smartphone data. Smartphone data, very interesting, incredible amount of data comes from smartphones. One is difficult to get, but smartphones, remember 2012, now maybe it's hitting 50 smartphones as a percentage of phones. But those days it was quite lower. So for people like us who want to cover everybody, we went for the network data. Network data covers all users, including the person with the cheapest phone, right? So now I'll show you some examples. Now this one, we use data from a taxi company. This is the Rajagiriya flyover, right? Rajagiriya flyover in the morning. So green means it's going fast. So green going towards Battaramulla is the green line, and the red line is towards Colombo. You can see? So you can see that the red line is almost standstill, right? It's crawling, while the other one is going at about 40. Now here, we don't have to, we ask the question, but we don't have to get the speed of all the cars. Just from the taxi company, we can get the speed, because that speed and the speed of everybody else is about the same, is the same. So you see, you ask the question of representativity, but you don't answer it uniformly for everything. For speed of traffic, getting one vehicle is enough, right? Maybe if you're doing if you're measuring the speed of a motorcycle versus a car, you might be getting a different answer, but generally speaking, they are not radically different, right? So that is in the afternoon, 1 p.m., and you can see the side roads are pretty much all the time blocked. That piece on near Valikada and the Navala turnoff, they are pretty much all the time red, right? That's because they're waiting for the light. Now this is a very interesting heat map that we generated. Now this one covers everybody, right? So that is small number of data points, but we get the insight that we want. This says Sunday morning, that's like mostly sort of beige, right? Brown, no reds, no blues on the heat map. So that means that people are, we have assigned a home zone to people, that is where their home, where their phones are between midnight and 3 in the morning. That's assigned to them, that's their home. So what this says is that they're home Monday morning, right? So when it varies from the home location, the colors change. So now if you look at the other peak, which is middle of the day, weekday, that is the top middle one, you see a big red blob where lots of people have come, and a lot of blue around it where people have, the population has decreased. So source is where the blue is, sink is where the red is. But Colombo is not the only sink, right? So there are sinks up there, which is probably, we actually found a sink in Ratmalana as well, that people are coming to Ratmalana as well. Can't remember what that is. That is Gampaha, possibly Gampaha. So we have the bigger detailed maps, right? So this kind of information we have shared with the megapolis planning people. And here, using data, multiple kinds of data, we are able to conclude that 47% of the people coming in the city of Colombo, in that red blob, different methods, 47 people comes from outside. So from those blue areas, right? And then the largest number comes from Maharagama, which was something surprising. I didn't think of it that way. The Maharagama Divisional Secretariat Division. And quite a number from Kolonnava, right? So if you are looking to see how the boundaries of Colombo can be changed, this kind of data would be useful, right? So here we are doing percentages. When we are doing percentages, and then we move it over to population share. So there may be errors, but it's relatively good defensible calculation that we are doing, right? Because otherwise people say, you know, half the population of in the city of Colombo don't come from Colombo or whatever. I don't know whether you knew that Colombo, which had a population of 700,000, now has a population of 550,000. City of Colombo. Why? It's going down, not going up. Any ideas why? Because more and more homes are being converted into offices, right? So, like my office used to be somebody's house. It's now an office. So when they count the number of people living in Colombo, that particular building doesn't have any people. The Fort subdivision has a population of about 12. Fort area, right? In the middle of the day, it's a lot of people, but everybody comes from somewhere else to that place, right? So for planning purposes, this kind of data is important. We've also taken, I don't have the slide here with me, we've also taken the loading factors on the base stations, and from that we can tell whether a place is primarily residential or whether it's primarily commercial. Because in a residential area, the peak will be in the evening, and weekdays will not be very different from weekends. While in a commercial area, the peak will be in the middle of the day, and weekdays and weekends are radically different, right? So here we don't even look at anybody's data. All the data that we have doesn't have your names on it. Doesn't even have the numbers. They are completely pseudonymized. We don't know who they are. We don't even know whether they're machines, right? Quite a number of, now every time this petrol pumps, they bring the credit card, that machine to you, that has got a GSM card in that. So that is also generating data, right? So we don't know any of these things, the data that we are using, right? This is another interesting study, because our study started before the Katnayaka expressway started. We were able to get before and after data. And what this shows is how the speeds have increased. So the speeds between Colombo and Negombo are shown there at 2 in the morning, 4, 6, midday, and so on. The brown line is what the speeds were before. And the after the road was opened, what the speeds were. Because now we have 3 roads to go to Negombo. The old road which goes through Pitipana, the A3, yes, the A3, which is the road that goes to Putlam, and the E3, yes. So those 3 roads, we have got the data, and it has been published. Now if you see the publication data, that is Blumenstock is somebody who's working at Berkeley now. Maldania is Dhanaja Maldania, who is a graduate of this place, now on a fully funded scholarship at University of Michigan, and Sri Ganesh Loganathan. It's a IEEE ACM conference paper, right? So we are here looking just at big numbers, right? We don't know who the poor are, we don't know what the women are, none of these things, right? So we are interested in bias. Now I'm moving into the ethics side of it, right? Bias. Are we being unfair to people? So the problem is we don't use AI much in our countries. We don't use algorithms much in public policy in our countries. So what are we going to study? I mean, even this stuff, when we started, we had to persuade them that this is useful. Now they are asking for this data, the transport planners. So what we decided to do was, first let's understand how it's working out in the developing countries, in the global north, where this data is being used, and then we'll see how it applies here. So I hope you can see these things. They are deciding that when you search for doctor, you're getting white men, and they're saying that's unfair, not women, not people of color. Babysitters are being scanned by AI to figure out who should be taken to look after your children. AI is being used to predict crime and deploy police, and they tend to be sent more to minority areas. Those are the kinds of issues that we get from the literature. So algorithms are used to reduce human subjectivity, because human beings have been biased, you know, black people get longer sentences and things like that. So the idea was to use it to get rid of bias, but as we experiment with it, we find that there is bias almost being built into the algorithms themselves. So it can be because of the data that is used, it can be because of the optimization that is used. So we have then a question of what is fair, right? What is unbiased and what is fair? So there is an article by Kleinberg. I don't have the reference here, sadly, but I'm sure you can easily find it, where he's a computer science guy and he looks at different kinds of biases. So I'll illustrate it to you using this. So the whole idea is that when black people who are in prison, they apply for bail, they apply for early release, right? White people who are in prison, they apply for early release. You go before a board and you make an argument. I'm very sorry about what I did. I have now spent 3 years of my life in prison. Can I leave? Under the standard procedures. So generally, the black people were getting longer sentences and so on. So they said, why don't we apply technology to this problem? So one issue, of course, is you're worried about a person leaving the prison and committing another crime. So you're looking at that person's life, the person who's in prison. Obviously, he's suffering because he's in prison. It's very expensive. Some people have calculated that it's more expensive to maintain a prisoner than to maintain a university student, right, in the United States, because the government pays for all this. For you guys, it might be interesting even to find out how that applies in this country. So you take all the higher education expenses, divide it by the number of students, because that's cost per student, and then you take all the prison expenditures divided by number of prisoners, that's cost per prisoner. So in the United States, somebody did this calculation and they found that the government was spending more money on prisoners than on university students. So, right? So it's good for the budget also to get these fellows out. Then you don't have to feed them, they can look after themselves. But you have to balance it against the community's interest in not having crimes committed against the community. That somebody who murdered doesn't come out and kill again. Somebody who raped does not come out and rape again. So that is called recidivism. So now they were using a software called Compass, right? So what you see here, that is the percentage of black and white defendants in each decile, that is each group of 10, that did not reoffend. So these are the people who are considered the lowest risk, those are the people who were considered higher risk at the top, right? So you divide the whole group into 10 parts. So 79% of low risk people among the whites did not commit another crime after released, based on the algorithm, right? That means that 21% committed some crime. With the high risk group, 70% of the white people who were released committed another crime, and 30% did not. So that's the results on the white side. On the black side, it is 77% did not commit another crime, but of the higher risk group, only 21%, smaller number, didn't commit a crime, right? So you could say that it's not fundamentally different, or you look at the data in another way. So we put the medium to high people over here, medium to high people over there, and the low risk people. Reoffended, did not reoffend. Now this has been studied to death. If you put Compass, go to the library and put Compass on any search, I'm sure you have databases here, yeah? ACM, IEEE, all these places, what's it? NIPS. New IPS, which is the highest profile conference for people doing data analytics. You'll find this has been studied endlessly, so you can find out for yourself. But basically, the argument is that we are trying to People are saying there is some bias built into the algorithm, that it's not unbiased. But according to this guy, he says we can make it fair within the blacks, that is, we can get that percentage even between the two sides. We can get it, we can reduce the harms, we can reduce the bias with the positive class, but we can't achieve complete fairness through algorithms. So some people are saying, can you remove the racial identification from the data set that you train? Now remember, because you're computer science people, I'm not getting into great detail. This is machine learning, right? So this is not somebody who sort of wrote a set of rules. This is a software was being trained on the data, right? So it's learning by itself. So the argument is that the data that we give it, what if we take the racial identity out and let it figure it out without any difference between black and white, right? But people have then tested it to find that it will figure it out. It will learn who's black and white because there are other attributes that are closely connected to that, right? So you can't hide it from the data set. So there are various ways in which we can increase fairness. I'll leave this slide set with you, but in fact, if you are interested in this subject, you don't have to listen to me. You can go do your own reading, because this is one of the most heavily studied algorithms that's around today, Compass. So what we are saying is we can understand this stuff that's going on in the developed world, and then when it comes here, we can, if it comes here, we can then be ready to make some intelligent observations about what is going on, right? Now this is the classic example that we have been using for marginalization. In the city of Boston, there is a nice little app called Street Bump. It has now gone to London and various other places. So you take your smartphone and you'll put an app on it that is provided by the city government. And as you get into the car, you just press one button and you leave it in a coffee cup or something like that. Just leave it there. The gyro, whatever, it can actually figure out, a smartphone has got enough software in it to figure out whether there's a pothole on the road, right? And where it is. So I go from, say, Moratuwa to Colombo every day, and I do this thing, and it's picking up all the rough places on the road. And when I finish the trip, I press another button, and that goes to the database. So it says starting point of the GPS point, end GPS point, roughness indicator. Now enough, thousands of people do this. You have a crowdsourced road roughness measurement mechanism. Very attractive, very sexy, right? To have, crowdsourced, people themselves generating the data, right? So everybody is very excited about this, right? Accelerometer of the smartphone collects the data. So then the city looks at, has got analytics running on it, and says that's an outlier, that's an odd piece of data, get rid of that. The rest of it, they will say, look, we are getting a lot of reports. This is a bad road. Now we send the crews out. We don't have endless numbers of people who can repair roads. So we prioritize the roads where the roughness indicator is high, right? So this is good. Now the question is, should we use it in a place like Colombo? What do you think? Any negatives? Should we? Are there roads, are there poor parts of Colombo? Now I once ran a little test with the people who work at Learn Asia, and I said, how many of you have been north of Peta? Grand Pass, Bloomendal, Modara, Mattakulya. Shall I run the test here? I can be sure that there are some people who have not gone to these places. Can I be sure? Is there anybody who lives in that area? That's where Colombo's poor live. That's our inner city. Right? The richest people in Colombo are in this, that Parliament Road corridor, and then Gaul Road, and so on. This is where the city has grown. So the richest people, the richest parts of Colombo were there in Modara in the Dutch period. And then they moved to Cinnamon Gardens, and they have moved, they came down Gaul Road, and now they have gone towards Battaramulla and so on, right? So now that's where the poor people live. A very high concentration of population as well. We could, at least in 2013 or so, we could say there were roads there that didn't have enough vehicles with smartphones in them. Mostly three-wheelers, right? So if we use this kind of data, is there a chance that the roads there would get neglected for the roads in Colombo 7? Or I'll give you another better example, which has nothing to do with, well, it has something to do with telephones. So I think everybody in this country knows that our railway system is in very poor shape. Unlike in other countries, we carry about 3 or 4% of our goods on the trains. Because anywhere we want to make the trains profitable, you have to carry freight, goods, right? United States, mostly goods. India, the railway service is profitable because they carry mostly goods. So I was saying, there's a friend of mine who was general manager there, and I said, why can't we do this? Right? Why can't we increase this? Because after railway lines were built to carry tea, right? It was built for freight, not for people. So he says, how can we do this? It's just a stupid phone, right? It's because of your phone that I can't fix it. So I say, what have I got to do with it? Because people think I'm like the owner of all the telephones in the country, right? Somebody gets electrocuted, I get a telephone call. Somebody gets lightning strikes them when they were using a phone. Professor, for telephone right? So your phones, that's the problem. So the argument is this. You see, rail lines are a scarce commodity. Double tracking is found only in certain places, single tracking in some places. Even with double tracking, sometimes you got to pull the train over to the side to let the other one go. Anytime you pull a passenger train onto the side, these are mostly government people, they start calling because they have phones now. So, but no calls are generated from the freight trains because the stuff that's in it, petroleum, wood, cement, they don't have telephones. So the natural tendency is to put the goods trains on the siding, and the passenger trains are given priority all the time. So now the goods train that was supposed to come to Colombo at 7 is coming at 9:30 every day. So nobody is going to put vegetables or anything perishable on these trains because that whole system has broken down. So that is the point about not being visible, marginalization, right? That is why when we were doing this work, we said we are going to try to cover the poor, make sure the poor are represented in the data, right? So we have some disagreements about this. Something better than nothing. Will it favor the people with smartphones? And then of course we have some internal debates about whether we can have some arguments here, some solutions here, where we say 50% of the repair trucks will be allocated based on the algorithm, and the other 50% will go to the places from which there are no signals, to the poor areas. We designate those as poor areas. Now I am skeptical about that working in our country, particularly with our municipal councils, but those are the kinds of discussions we should have. Again, this is an ethics question, right? In the design and use of things, software that people like you will be designing and deploying once you graduate, right? This is professional ethics, these questions. So I think I have taken too long. Shall I stop here and take some questions? Because I'm going to talk about poverty here. So you have a choice. Mobile network big data to help with SDGs, or whatever questions you want to ask me. Now we're at 10 o'clock. Your preference? After 1 hour, I'm not going to take silence as an answer. You have to talk. Yes, keep going. Okay, I have one vote from the front. I'm interested in the opinion of those at the back of the class. More interesting people at the back of the class. So I will do what people at the back of the class. See, I'm trying to get fairness. So, yes, what is your preference, sir?
I have a question.
Good. Go ahead.
Now, the railway department has a website for
Ticket.
schedules of the rail trains. Now, I feel like it doesn't work as we are expecting. So, how about getting those projects, like government projects, to the undergraduates who are in the universities? Now, they often, now there is ICT is there. We can do something for the government.
Okay. Good question. Let's see whether we have any more. The first and most important thing to remember is we need systemic solutions, right? So this idea that technology can just zoom in and solve a small part of the problem is not always correct. So for example, bus timetables. One of my favorites is when I am in the United States, I can actually stand at a bus stop, and the bus stop has got I'm not talking everywhere in the United States, right? This is a particular, very advanced public transportation place. Forget about the United States. Their public transportation terrible. Netherlands, right? I can stand in a place and there's a LED display at the bus stop. So I can look at it and it tells me when the next bus is coming. And it changes, right? In 7 minutes, and then suddenly it says 9 minutes. So that means that the bus is communicating with the system and is telling the bus stop when the next bus is coming. In the United States, I have observed that you can actually you must understand, I have actually used public transport in many countries. I like public transport. When it says a bus, sometimes you are frustrated because the driver won't go. He will stay a little while because he's trying to hit the exact time at the next bus stop, right? So he's supposed to be at 7:21 at another place. He will get there at 7:21, not before, not later, right? So that shows a certain kind of discipline and a certain kind of traffic pattern. Now in our country, we try to do that, it will be a madhouse because nobody can actually get to any place on time. Even I, who try to get to places on time, I couldn't get today. So we have to look at our local circumstances. Now, on the train schedules, you have to first understand, we actually don't have enough trains. On the coastal line, for example, which could take a lot more people, double track up to Kaluthara, I think, right? We can be putting more trains, but we are not investing because the losses of the Sri Lanka railways are actually higher than the revenues. You understand what I'm saying? If the revenues, I can't remember the exact number, are 67 billion or something, the losses are higher. And then in 2012 or thereabouts, when we connected Jaffna, after we rebuilt the road, so we finally had more track, more passenger miles, the losses increased, right? So it's fundamentally a loss-making operation. The more track you put, the Veliatta line you put in it, the losses will obviously increase, right? So it's fundamentally a broken system, and we are not investing enough. We are not putting enough proper trains, proper engines, and so on. Now, you can say all this is true, but the long distance trains are given priority. The intercity trains and so on are given priority, right? So we can have reliable timetables for that. We can even have, I think we have the timetables that they give are relatively reliable. I go to Jaffna on that train quite well, every 6 months or so, and it's quite good. The reason is that that train is causing everybody else to slow down. It's that argument I told you. So that to get one system to work fast, the intercity, the long distance trains to work fast, you're slowing down the local trains. And the local trains are slowing down the goods trains, right? So there is a nice optimization problem right there of how to manage these three priorities. So my argument is that we need a systemic solution rather than simply improving the timetables, right? But if we can, now right now we think of timetables as things that are static. If we can think of dynamic timetables, that would be, I think, interesting. Because even if we don't fix this stuff, somebody sitting in Kalutara or Payagala or someplace can look on the smartphone and figure out when the next train is coming. That might be helpful. So that's dynamic things. So those are the kinds of things that I think you could be doing. Now, when it comes to ICTA, when we started ICTA in 2003, I was involved. Our main job was to persuade people in government that ICT was useful. Now my problem is that everybody knows that ICT is useful. So it's like I can't believe the requests that are being made of me. Ayurveda people want my help. I said, what has ICT got to do with you? Ayurveda department. Cultural fund, just to give you some example. There are QR codes on pillars outside Sigiriya now. Has anybody been to Sigiriya recently? Next time you go, look for it, right? So there are some places outside some caves and ponds and so on, pillars. On the pillar there's a QR code. So you take your smartphone and you take a picture of the QR code. Now you can get a description of what that place is about. What a guide would tell you, what an educated, informed guide would tell you, now you get it. You can get it in German, you can get it in Japanese, you can get it in Chinese if you want, right? Now this is something we did. So we are helping the Central Cultural Fund. We are helping the Ayurveda department. I am working with the city of Colombo. How many people do you think I have? 500 people? No. 300? No. No guesses? Just around 100. So we have a resource allocation problem, right? And all our money, originally we got it from the World Bank and we had a lot more flexibility about how to spend the money. All our money now comes from the government. So when it comes from the government, we have to have, there's something called the National Planning Department, and they have to approve every expenditure. So we can only do approved projects. So right now, my that's a long answer to a short question. We don't have a project with the railway department now. But of course, you're free to work with them and get this kind of thing done. Right? We must have done something with railways at some point, but right now we don't have anything. But we have a huge problem. We have to shed projects. We can't keep doing these large numbers of projects. So what we are going for is, just to give you an example of the kind of things we like to prioritize, is we are going for what we call cross-government projects. Cross-government project example would be that we are working with the Surveyor General to take all the maps and put them in digitized form. Then we are working with, say, Central Bank to say where the banks and ATMs are. So that's another layer on the map. electricity board to see where the electric lines, the substations and so on are, another layer on top. Each layer, each organization is responsible for, but depending on the governance regime, people can access different amounts. So just think of a use case. Somebody is trying to set up a hotel. They want to know where the archaeological sites are. They want to know whether the electricity, how the electricity lines are. They want to know what the roads are. They want to know whether there are any banks nearby for the tourists to go to. ATM machines. They can get all this information from what is called a National Spatial Data Interface. Right? This is a really challenging project, highly challenging project. Once we finish it, it will be extraordinary. I think it's like a game changer. Because the whole point in government is if you can give the responsibility for each layer to each person, each agency, they will keep it updated. Right? Right now what we got is a lot of obsolete data that the government it puts out. So if we can do that, and then the user can get access to the whole lot. Without the survey department data, the electricity data doesn't make sense. It's the combination of it being on a map with GPS coordinates that is useful. So this is the kind of thing that we are giving priority to. We are doing some small projects, but that's going to be the exception more than the rule. So I gave a long answer to a short question. Anybody else? Yes? Which projects? How to get involved in which projects? Government projects.
And I have another question. After graduation, apart from the people who are for higher studies, most of us will be looking for jobs in the private sector. Why is it not there a good job market for software engineers in the government sector?
Okay. Let's see. Let's start. I think I'll take your second question first. It's easier. The government has got a national export strategy, and in the national export strategy, it's very broadly consulted, good document. 6 priority sectors have been identified, and IT and IT-enabled services are one of the priority sectors. We are doing somewhere in the range of 1 billion in exports right now. The objective is that we will be doing 5 billion by 2022. That's a big jump, right? That we will have created 1,000 new startup companies between now and then, and that we would have created 200,000 jobs. The real challenge is that the software industry and the business process management industry, which you guys probably won't go into, their only raw material is brains. It's you guys, right? There's no other raw material. It's just people, right? Intelligent people. That's the raw material. So very high value add. So even though the exports from garment manufacturing might be higher, quite a lot of the inputs for garment manufacturing, the dyes, the zippers, the buttons sometimes, the fabric comes from outside, value added and exported. But here, very little comes from outside. 90% possibly of the inputs are local. So this is a very good sector, right? But we have a shortage of people, serious shortage of people in software industry and other places. So the shortage is causing what? When there's a mismatch of supply and demand, the demand is high and supply is low, prices move up, right? So your starting wages, I understand, are now rather high, about 1 lakh sometimes, right, to start, right? And you get good officers and all kinds of benefits in the private sector. Because they have markets, they are earning dollars, they are paying good salaries. So that is the private sector attraction. And the private sector is screaming. They want more, right? They want more of people like you. They want these programs to expand. Otherwise, they can't meet the 5 billion target. What can we do with the government? That's a huge challenge. So when we started the ICT agency in 2003, our thinking was that for 5 years we could sort of do a shock treatment, get certain projects implemented and completed, and then we could go out of business. Because government organizations would be capable of maintaining the software, developing new digital solutions and so on. So we actually had in that law, it was a very unusual law, perhaps the only law in Sri Lanka, that had what is generally called a sunset provision. A sunset provision means that we say we create an organization and after 5 years it is shut down. It no longer exists. So ICTA should have shut down in 2008. It's still there. They amended the law. Partly because I actually told the minister who was involved in that decision, Mr. Milinda Murugoda, I was telling him, now I've gone back, I think we made a mistake. We couldn't have fixed government in 5 years. I strongly believed in it. I was very proud of that provision. But I said we couldn't have fixed government in 5 years. I'm not even sure whether we can ever fix government in terms of IT, right? The problem is we give them software, we develop software systems, we do business process re-engineering, we work with them, we do all this. Not us only. We bring private sector firms to actually do the work. And then when we hand over, there's nobody to manage, right? So now we come to the question of what is the government IT service. There is something called the government IT service. The salaries are extremely low. Right? They are standard government salaries. So the issue then is it possible to have an IT service which has got higher salaries than the other planning service, the combined service, the technical services, etc., etc., etc. Government doesn't seem to like that approach. They have standard salaries because people go on strike if you have pay one group higher than the other group. You have seen this all over the place. No, even the universities sometimes gets closed down because right? So this is a problem. Now ICTA doesn't pay government salaries, but one of my biggest jobs is trying to defend the ICTA salary structure. Because I am continually under pressure from the government people saying, you people are paid too much. I don't get paid anything, but I have to keep my people happy. So that is a big challenge. So that is the answer to your second question, right? There are some departments like Passport Office. They work very, very closely with the private sector. So a lot of it's actually a public-private partnership, the issuance of passports. So 90% of the people who are doing that are private sector people. That is one way to solve the problem. It has got some negatives as well, right? Because sensitive information is now with the private sector. So there are some issues that we are looking at. Your first question was how can people in the system here get involved with projects? Because the companies like to get you involved in projects because that's a good way of interviewing people. We like to get people involved in projects. We have had multiple groups of people from this department work with us on data analytics because we are always looking to see who the bright people are. Because our proposition is you come, you publish, you go to a good university with full scholarship. We have got people, University of Oregon, University of Michigan, 2 people in Japan. Pretty much everybody who wants to go is gone, right? Because we give them publications, we give them a research record. They get into networks where people like Blumenstock. You should check that guy's profile. Extraordinary publication record, highly respected. So people like him will even write letters for our applicants. So they get full scholarships, they go to good universities to get PhDs. So that is our proposition. We don't pay that much as the private sector, but we have a combined package, right? So we all like to take you guys for internships and projects. Now, the government doesn't have that kind of flexibility, but you're giving me some ideas, which is how can we, it'll take me a few months, structure a system where you guys can do some projects with ICTA, right? We've been doing mostly project management, procurement, managing projects and so on, but we are trying to strengthen our technology side. We have already created something called the Technology Foresight Council, headed by Sanjeeva Veeravarna, to get the overall architecture kind of issues. So I think a lot of you can benefit by participating in that kind of activity. So you have given me an idea, I will work on it, but I need a few months because there's got to be some restructuring done internally so that we can absorb. One of the things that I really dislike is these young people being brought into organizations without adequate supervision. You're there, and then we'll give you a letter and you go. That is not of no benefit to anybody. Not good for the student, not good for us. We need to have proper supervision capability. So, you have given me an idea. I'll work on it. Anything else? Yes?
Are there any open source projects for the government?
Government likes open source. Government likes open source. So just to give you an example, we are currently doing a very interesting activity with the elections department. So, as you know, elections can be very sensitive, right? People can think, like I was telling you here, that algorithms, all these convoluted things that people can't understand. Only you guys can understand what's going on inside, right? And even fully trained computer scientists can't understand the kind of work that's done in AI now, right? Where you basically, the data is fed in, the machine learns, and what the hell it's learning, we don't know, right? So people get very confused and suspicious. So what we are trying to do with the elections department is to stay away from proprietary altogether. All the code will be on GitHub. Everything is going to be open source. So if anybody wants to challenge any of the systems that we are putting in place, we are building a nomination system, we are building a complaints handling system, voter count, that is as you vote to get real-time reports on how many people have voted, and then of course the classic one, which is counting the votes. All these things are going to be open source. And the whole idea being, if somebody wants to check it out, they can check it out. Everything is open. Yes?
So you know that Imsi is collecting telephone reports, and you know that
taxi data, yes.
Yeah, taxi data, and there were telephone GPS reports are collected so that you could measure that those people are in this
area or not, yes.
Yeah, I mean, is it ethical to collect those data?
Okay, now we got the big question. Is it ethical to collect the data? Right. So the basic issue is, I would think that individually identifiable data has to be treated very, very carefully. Individually identifiable data. That is, where was I at a particular point of time, me, at a particular point of time, and doing what? That is personally identifiable data. But we don't work with such data in our work. We take something called pseudonymized data. Pseudonymized data is we take a random set of digits, and every A number and B number that is in a call detail record. A number is the person who called, B number is the person who received the call. Both those are replaced by this other number. Now we can do that, we can treat each individual record as a unique one, and we can change the numbers all the time. Then that's called anonymized, right? If you do that, you will never see patterns. That is, your call, I won't see how it behaves over time, right? Now here, with pseudonymized, I'm assigning the same string of digits to the same A number throughout, right? So why are we, so I would say we don't know it's you, but we know it's a human being sometimes, because some machines are also now communicating using GSM cards, right? But we know it's a human being. Under the existing laws in almost all the countries, if we don't go for personally identifiable information, there really is nothing wrong about it in law, right? But ethics is not about what's in law. Ethics is what about whether it's right or wrong. The gray area is what ethics is. It's not maybe legal, but not proper, right? So that is the kind of question we should be asking in a setting like this. My question is, if we can help you plan your traffic, right? Now if you think about it, now as I was coming from Colombo to here, it took me more than an hour to get here, which I never thought it would. I'm using Google Maps, right? That is actually an accumulation of all the people in Colombo who are using Google Maps. They are reporting back to Google. Google is showing me the red areas and the green and so on and so forth based on all our information that we are giving. We are getting something in return. We are also giving something. So my question is, in a modern society, that seems to be a necessary trade-off, right? That we should be able to use some of this data. People are using this data for marketing, for advertising, for all kinds of things. Now, if you want the really nasty cases, you have to look at places like Ukraine, where there was an anti-government sort of gathering in the Maidan, in the public square, and all the people who were there were getting messages from the government saying, you are members of an illegal gathering, you should disperse, otherwise action will be taken against you. So this is really scary. The government knew that you're there, the government is communicating to you. So they investigated and they found that they had put IMSI catchers there. It's the phone companies were not giving that information. They had put IMSI catchers. Anybody here know what IMSI catcher is? No? IMSI catcher is sometimes called a stingray. It's a device that mimics a cell phone tower. So it tells the phones that it's a cell phone tower. It's not, right? So they were catching that on that fake device, and they were sending SMSs to all these people saying you're members of an illegal gathering. Now that is really bad stuff, right? Because that was, very intrusive. Will that kind of thing happen? I can't guarantee that it won't happen. But I can tell you that organizations like ours, we are very careful to use only pseudonymized data. We don't even have a translation protocol with us at any point. We take it from the phone company after it has been pseudonymized. I'm also working with the healthcare people right now at ICTA to develop special safeguards for health data, because that I think is the most sensitive of the lot. And the government had a priority to do something called the General Data Protection Law, but now the timetable is a little off because for about 2 or 3 months we didn't have a government. So I had a bit of a problem. I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. Right? I didn't know who my minister was. I didn't know what anything was. I didn't know how I was going to pay my salaries. So because of that, everything has got slowed down. But, privacy, big issue, right? So what we can do, we can take an absolute question, because if you look at it, I told you there are people, there's still, as of 2016, there's still 11.8 or 11.2% households in this country that don't have a telephone? Right? So you're saying, hey, Sri Lanka has got more than 100 telephones per population, right? We have 21 million people and we have 23 million SIMs. But that is all those things on credit card machines and the dual SIM phones that you guys are carrying. How many of you are carrying dual SIMs? No? All those dual SIM. Those are that is what is the number, right? These little babies are not carrying phones. My grandchildren are not carrying SIMs. They are part of the population of this country now. So actually, it's 88.2 or 88.8% of the households that have a phone. Now, the people on that other side who don't have phones, they have 100% privacy, I would say. Nobody is analyzing their data. I'm worried about them. I'm worried about them being ignored by public policy, right? So in the north, we have done some research in the northern province. We are very concerned about people being left out. So these are the balances. This is what ethics is about. How do you balance people being ignored and people being intruded upon, right? Good question. Yes. That's fine. Okay, two important questions. Now, what I've done is, just so you guys know the kind of things that are being done, I'm circulating 2 annual reports from the 2 sides, the most recent one and the previous one, so you can take a look at it. Okay, first question is it realistic? Is it realistic to get consent of 21 million people, right? No, you don't. People are using this kind of data, these aggregated pseudonymized data. There are exceptions to the GDPR that you can use it for certain kinds of research. No. I was a former regulator. I know what the laws are. We have safeguards in the licenses of the phone companies themselves. And within those safeguards, you can't release individually identifiable information. That is against the license. So that's why I kept saying we use only pseudonymized data. It's not like we take data with personal information to our organization, then we pseudonymize. We take pseudonymized information from the phone companies. We don't even have it. We don't have the conversion key, right? So that is the principle. So your question was, yeah. So the issue, of course, is that you're going to the consent model. So the consent model, which I have studied a lot, and there's a whole group of us who no longer believe that the pure consent model is going to work, is going to be practical. Because the consent model came when we were filling up loan forms, loan requests, consenting to medical information in the United States. We were giving all this information. We said, I'm giving this information. You can use it only for the stated purposes and with my consent, right? So the question is, I brought up the question of the VLR for a purpose, visitor location registry. How would you think the VLR should be treated? VLR is, you're sitting here, I'm sitting here, my phone is talking to the tower. I didn't do anything, right? So is it my data that I have to give consent for it? Is it necessary for the running of the network? Right? It's actually theirs. Yeah. VLR can be very sensitive. I agree. But is it really yours for you to give consent? Can you give consent to VLR? Is it your data? You're claiming it's your data. I would say it's jointly produced data or data that is necessary for the running of the network. Because if you take that piece out, all mobile calls will fail. You'll never be able to terminate a call because you don't know where the phones are, right? So my argument is it's not 100% yours. At most, it's jointly produced by the network and your device. And since you bought the device, maybe you have some rights to it, right? So the question is, we shouldn't become absolutist about these things. If you look at things like, say, take a spread of infectious diseases, right? Again, research that has been done by your graduates from this program, we should be able to, now in Pakistan, they can actually track dengue. Ebola, some fellow with Ebola comes to the Colombo airport and starts going through the city. We should be able to track that guy. Now that is individually identifiable data, right? I'm asking you in ethics class, how should we deal with that? That person's personal privacy versus the safety of millions of people that he may touch, he may connect to by traveling through Colombo after landing in the airport. These are the ethical questions we have to grapple with. You don't have simple answers to these things, right? So these are the kinds of questions people are grappling with. I'm actually on the privacy advisory group of the UN. The UN has set up a privacy advisory group and I'm on that. So these are the kinds of things that we are kicking around, right? So we have to balance these two things. Do we have a third party, that was the other question, do we have a third party entity supervising LearnAsia to see whether we are doing the right thing? There is a research, what's it called, the term? Anyway, there are approval committees, ethics boards. Generally speaking, universities have these. I have gone through them in the United States. We have broad ethics approval committees. So we have to, when we submit a proposal dealing with human subjects, we have to say we have got it approved by that committee. In Sri Lanka, we have it in the medical faculty. And in my case, I have run it through the medical faculty when we were doing some medical research using something like machine learning in about 2008 with Carnegie Mellon. We ran it through that process because it was human subjects, medical information. We don't run it through that group now because they are medical people. They don't really have expertise on our subjects. We are, however, subject to very strict non-disclosure agreements that we have signed with the phone companies, which means that if we break the non-disclosure agreements, we will most probably have to close down. The penalties are so high, everything I have will have to go. So we sign with them, then we sign with everybody who touches our data. So if you come and work on our data, you will have to sign an NDA, and either I or Sri Ganesh will come and sit down with you and say, do you understand what this is? If you break this thing, we will, the whole organization will be in jeopardy. We'll go over the pages. It's 10 pages, or it's a long document. So that's the safeguards that we have right now. But this is a very interesting challenge. If you impose strict, I mean the European rules everybody is talking about, what is happening with the European rules that Google and people who collect the data can do anything they want. It's when they give it to a new company, a startup, that now they can't give it. So it is actually beneficial to the existing companies and harmful to the people who are challenging the dominance of the existing companies. And China, which doesn't have these rules, is going to actually have much better AI than Europe because they have more data. If anybody wants to read up on AI and world trends, there's a man called Kai-Fu Lee who's got a PhD, Kai-Fu Lee, L-E-E, K-A-I-F-U, Kai-Fu Lee, AI Superpowers, I think is the name of the book, came out in late 2018. Taiwanese Carnegie Mellon PhD, worked on AI, worked for Microsoft, worked for Google, set up Google in China, now runs a venture capital fund, and he's saying China is going to beat everybody in AI because they have more data. You must understand, that's the key. You have to have brains and you have to have data. Because just brains won't do, you got to have data to train the software on. So Europe will not have, so that's something we'll be looking at. I mean, you'll get an opportunity to comment on our drafts if we get to the GDP, our general data protection law, that I will be personally involved in getting through. We are trying to get a balance between protection and innovation. Hey, this is going very slow, man. Share. There's a lot of people in this room. Okay. No other questions? Shall I go back to my poverty mapping, SDGs? "20 minutes we have. Now, one of my, of course, pet issues is the fact that we are not using our women enough in our labor force, including in the IT labor force. Sri Lanka's women's labor force participation is 36%. And it will be even lower if we discount the Nuwara district. Why is the Nuwara district women's labor force participation high, may I ask? Nuwara district has got the highest women's labor force participation, people in the formal labor force. Why, may I ask? You guys are analytical thinkers, tell me. Tea industry, right. Women work in the tea industry, right? So can you imagine, 36%. That's it. The rest of them are at home doing work, of course, not in the formal sector, they are working. They work hard, I have no doubt about this. But the particular problem that I have is that if we are to meet the 5 billion target, I need a lot more people staying on in the companies. And what I've been observing is that we have professional women who get good education, they go into the workforce, they get married, first child, second child, they're out. In my organization, I've held on to them. In my organization, we even had affirmative action policy for men. I had to say that whenever a man applies for a job, they had to be given special consideration because we were mostly a women organization before we got into big data. But anyway. So I'm rather disappointed that I'm not getting any questions from any of the women in this room. I'm not looking at anybody. I'm just expressing my unhappiness. That shouldn't stop the other people from asking questions. Okay, so that seems to have shut down all that conversation, right? Let's go. Poverty. Somebody was interested in poverty. Of course we are interested in poverty. SDG goal number 1, eliminating poverty, right? So the issue is, poverty is very difficult to measure, right? If you ask people, they can't tell you, or they won't tell you. Some people think they won't tell you because it makes sense to understate your wealth and your assets and your income. But sometimes people can't tell. So the way I figured it out was that I make my living on consulting type assignments. So my income can fluctuate very radically, right? Sometimes I make a ton of money, sometimes I make no money, and so on, right? So it just goes up and down. So the only time I know how much money I have made is when I fill out my tax forms. That's when I know, because I don't have a monthly paycheck, right? So at that point, I go through all my records and I figure, oh, I have made this much money. I have gone up or gone down. How I know? Then I can divide it by 12, or I can tell somebody if they ask me, this is what I make in a month, right? Now, I'm an odd character, you could say. But no, I'm like most people. There are only so many people in the formal workforce. I was talking to the people at the Employee Trust Fund, and they have only 2.6 million members. They think that they should be covering about 4 million people of a population of 20 million. So where are the rest of them? The rest of them are not in the formal workforce. If you're not in the formal workforce, you don't get a salary. You don't have EPF cut, you don't have ETF cut, you just get money at various points and you function. In the north, people are living off remittances. Your relatives in Canada, your relatives in the UK are sending you money. So getting a sense of poverty is very, very difficult. So there are various ways that you do this. Instead of asking people about their income, you ask them about expenses. Because expenditures, they can tell better. How much are you spending a month? Then you kind of make an inference about how much they are making. You can estimate based on assets. Do they have a TV set in their home? Those kinds of things, right? So, and then to do even those, to figure out those kinds of things, you have to go and go look. So a census is a very expensive thing. It's done only once in 10 years. Census means that we go to every house. So we don't ask lots and lots of questions. 5% of that group we ask detailed questions. I was sent an online form in 2011, which I filled up online. So they're getting to some advanced state. Then we do periodic household income and expenditure surveys. We do a labor force survey. Labor force survey we do 4 times a year. Big sample, 25,000 divided by 4. So we do about 8,000 people throughout the country. About 1,000 people work for the Census and Statistics Department to do these kinds of surveys, right? So what we are thinking is it possible to use pseudonymized call detail records, which cover most people? Is it possible to get some correlations and help fill in the gaps in the data and to improve the data, right? So the model is, so what we are trying to do is take gram Niladhari level, convert to a relevant geographical units. So this is BTS's base transceiver station, those things that you see on towers, right? So there can be more than one BTS on a tower. So we are running statistical tests trying to figure out whether we can at least sort of calibrate this kind of data, which can be made available every few hours if you want, right? While census data is very expensive and is generated once in 10 years, survey data is very expensive and is generated at most once in 3 years. Labor force data, which is a smaller sample, 3 times a year, 4 times a year. And this stuff, costless almost, because it's a byproduct of something else, right? So research had been done in this area by a woman called Valerie Frias Martinez. Has anybody heard of Professor Luika Rashid? No. You will hear of her. She is a Sri Lankan who is working at the University of Maryland and is quite active in Lanka Software Foundation and so on. I know her quite well. And she's also helped us. So she works with Valerie. Valerie had done some work in Colombia or Guatemala or someplace where they correlated, they found certain features of mobile behavior and poverty or wealth, right? So the whole idea is if you can get this correlated, then you can read from one from the other. So the features that we have on the CDR side are total duration of incoming calls, total duration of outgoing calls, roughly, you know, poor people make less calls than rich people kind of story. Then you come to how many contacts you have, how frequently you contact them, and then mobility, radius of gyration, distance between home and visited BTS, number of trips. So if you look at me today, so I was maybe in the Dematagoda exchange in the morning, then I came through whatever, the Hivala, Kohuvala, etc., etc. Now I'm in the Moratu exchange, Moratu BTS, then I'll go to Kollubitia from here, and so on, right? So that's the radius of gyration, the number of base stations that I visit. How many different cells I've gone to, what the distance that I have traveled, etc. So the basic argument that she was making was that something that all the urban design people, now you have an urban design or city and country, town and country planning department here, they will say that the rich travel further than the poor. The poor travel short distances. So their argument was that we could get some indication of poverty using mobile data. Now we looked at the census, and the census has got all this information, right? Age, employment, gender, education, not individually identifiable, I want to emphasize. They've got a very strong safeguards. They don't release the microdata. Education levels, housing type, type of walls, type of roof, type of flow, right? Things that the census person can observe and tick, 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 right? So we looked at it in terms of Jaffna. No, not Jaffna, the whole northern province. So we have 900 Gram Niladhari divisions in the northern province, where we have government data that can go down to that level. So we can't tell, we can tell the Gram Niladhari division which have the most poor people. Not that there are no rich people there, but a majority of the people in that area are poor according to the census data. You just think, I mean, in India they have this thing called paka houses and something. A house with a tile roof and cement floors and all that is supposed to be better than a house with a thatched roof and things like that, right? We have 300 base stations. 900 Gram Niladhari division, 300 base stations. Now this is not the case. I mean, just in Colombo you'll have more than 300, right? But here, because the population is spread out, they serve them with small number. So then we had to convert the GNs to the BTS using these different formula. And we found a very unusual pattern, which was contradictory to the literature. The literature said that poor people travel short distances, they don't have a great variety of places they visit and so on. In Jaffna, what we got is, so that is the most educated. We are saying the people who are most educated, degree advanced level, that's the top two rows, right? No, that's Western province. Now here this Northern province. Degree, A level, O level, secondary, primary, no schooling. And then on this side, radius of gyration, the distance you go to different places, different cells that you go to, travel distance, maximum travel distance. So we don't get a clear picture of what the literature suggests, that the rich travel long distances and the poor travel short distances. We are getting the opposite in the northern province. You can see we then did it for the western province and we are getting expected results. That is, people who are more educated, who are richer, they have high number of cell counts, their travel distance is high, their travel distance is high, right? So this is quite a puzzle. We haven't solved now these housing types. Permanent housing, semi-permanent house, improvised house, unclassified. Same issue with northern province. Oh, northern province has gone wacko. Northern province is anomalous. So people in the regions with higher socioeconomic levels, right, have a higher number of unique contacts. That's for the Western provinces. Speak to their contacts more frequently, have a greater geographical spread, there is higher physical distance between contacts that is speak to, right? Travel to more unique places, like me today. So I came here, and maybe the network thinks that I was actually stopped in Kohuala, that I visited some people in Kohuala because I was stuck in traffic for so long. And he doesn't know why that I was in traffic. Sometimes it asks me, Google asks me, can you give me a report on such and such bakery? I didn't go to the bakery, I was just stuck in traffic near the bakery, right? So that's how the network's mistakes, right? So this kind of data will give that I have been to a lot of base stations today, even up to now, right? So travel to more unique BTS regions. People with lower socioeconomic standards have fewer unique contacts, speak less frequently, have a smaller geographical spread, travel less frequently. This is what we found for the Western province and is replicated from Latin America. Opposite kinds of observations in the Northern province. So now we are saying, what the hell is going on? Is it because of the war? Is it because of the remittance economy? We have no idea. And as I began, I said we are a multi-method research organization. We don't do only one kind of research. So now this kind of questions, we are not going to answer using data analytics. We will try to answer it using some other research. We will try to find some money and conduct focus groups or whatever to find out why people are traveling long distances when they are poor in the Northern province. So this is one case where in fact we have not been able to give a good conclusions, and we are trying to see whether we'll have to do more research to answer these questions. But you can sort of see what the problem with the SDGs is. I know you're doing some work on SDGs. 17 SDGs, 169 targets or something under the 17, and then even more, 200 something indicators. So in fact, some of those indicators are not measurable. There just isn't data. So the idea was that big data would help answer those questions. Earlier when they said maternal mortality or something, you know, that's easy. How many women go to hospital to give birth and how many of them die? That's a relatively easy number to get in almost all the countries of the world. But this stuff is very, very difficult to get, the kind of data that is now required. So we have a total of 5 minutes left for the last questions of the kind that I like, not the kind that I don't like. But I told you what the questions I like, no? From the generally silent people in the room, people in the back of the room, people who don't normally ask questions. Fairness. Anything to do with ICTs? Actually, I don't have to leave exactly at 11. I told Visakha I'll leave at 11, but my next meeting got cancelled. So I can stay a little longer if you always want to talk. No? What are your experiences with government, e-government, digital government? Are you unhappy? Have you received any good services from government using on your phone? He says no. I will guarantee you that everybody here got their exam results on their phone. Everybody here, right? When nobody knew what the internet was. In the late 90s, people would go to these communication centers and they would get exam results from that thing. And I can remember what a good thing it was. Because otherwise, you know, you have, say, bad results, right? You're standing in front of the notice board. This is how I got my results. So I had to go and stand there. You're looking at your results. Everybody else is looking at, right? So now we have to, your world has fallen on your head and now you have to explain it to people right there. Now it's a private activity. Huh? Those days it was a public activity. Can you imagine how much better you people have than we had? Huh? So, no, nobody has used government services on the web? So next time you go to Sigiriya, we'll see whether we can do it. We've just introduced a way of buying tickets to go to Vilpattu electronically, on the web. On the phone maybe, at least on the web. Right? So that we can have quotas and prevent too many people from going to these places. And we'll extend it to Yala and all these other places in the next few months. I told you about the QR codes. No other complaints? The university must be mistreating you using ICTs. I used to tell my students, we were talking about privacy earlier. After all, it's an ethics class. So I used to, when I was teaching, we had something called reserve. So that is, I would put the required readings of the week in the library and I would say, this can be taken out for two hours, it can be taken out for a day, etc. So then I would tell my students, because I'm absolutely sure that nobody reads anything that I tell them to read. Now I have given you so many reading suggestions today, right? Read up on Compass, the software. Read up on Joshua Blumenstock. Read the book by Kai-Fu Lee, right? I've given you so many suggestions. I love reading. Huh? So I used to tell these people, you know, if I really want, I can go and find out whether you took whether you're doing the readings. How? The library keeps records, I can see, right? But this is pre-ICT. Now, we are capable of actually telling how much time you spent on each page. We are introducing e-textbooks. And we can actually tell how much time you spent on a page. We can look at your MCQs, multiple choice questions, and if all of you are getting a question wrong, we can develop analytics which will say that that's not your fault, it's ours. If all of you are getting the question wrong, the person to blame is the person who set the question, right? And then we can take that out of the count, right? So remember, this is where the world is heading. Very, very granular information. Now, are these bad things? Should I know how many pages you turned in the book that I gave you to read in your class? Is it an unreasonable invasion of your privacy? It is, they think. I mean, somebody who never followed the rules, I sympathize with you, but what to do? Anything else? Not too many questions. I have one. The heat maps, yes? What are the applications of that information? Yeah. So we were just trying to do it to understand for ourselves. This one, yeah. So if we can see those now, can you see how important that will be for transportation planning, right? Yeah, you know, there's the 3K project, Kaduwela, Kottava, Kadawatha. We're going to have 3 multimodal centers to handle the transportation. You've seen the some of you have seen the one in Kottawa. Just before you come to the highway, on the left-hand side, there's a big building that has already been constructed. That's the first one, right? So we are actually doing some research around that. We are working with Japanese, with University of Tokyo. Oh, I forgot to tell you about that. In addition to the big data, we have got consent forms. Somebody was interested in whether we use consent forms. We got consent forms and downloaded software into people's into their smartphones to see what they do once they get off the train or once they get off the bus, because that's very difficult to tell using only big data, right? So here they have actually some drop-down menus, and they're actually answering some questions, what they're doing. So that data is not unfortunate. It's not really random, because we couldn't get random. We had to work with the billing, but there's some element of randomness in that. So the whole idea is that if we first find out where people are coming to, we can supplement the transportation for that area. Now, one of the things, for example, that we found in our research is that there's a lot of people coming from Kolonnava. Lots of people don't think about the Kolonnava run. That is, they're coming through the low-level road. So ideally, we would be putting more buses and so on for that route, or removing or even changing the traffic light frequencies to let them come through, right? But the government's plan actually is to create more sinks, right? So the ideal model would be to go from this one, where everybody is coming to this Colombo area, but we have more red spots, more places where people go to. So Kadawatha, Kaduwela and Kottawa are likely to also have high rises and office buildings there, so that people will be going there. If you think about it, if you have more people going in more directions, the traffic load, the congestion problem could be less, right? So that people don't have to come to the same place. You can just imagine the convergence of all the traffic to Colombo is going to be tough. So if we can have that kind of spreading out using this kind of data, that will work. But remember, the decision makers are not computer scientists. They are not data scientists. They are town and country planners. They are the decision makers. So we have to give them the information that they will then use their thinking to implement. But that's what's going on. Yes? Yeah, yeah.
Because I know my personal experience, if you go out from Colombo about 4:30 p.m., you have to stay in traffic in Panchigavatta, then in Maligavatta, then in Orgudavatha, and also in Padiwood. After that, you have to again stay if you are going to Padavatta in Tiruvathudu.
Yeah.
So by introducing something, a huge car park near Padiwood, and then all the employees who are coming to the Colombo, we have introduced them a public transport service where they can go all around Colombo. So can't we reduce traffic by using that method?
People transport is the most difficult problem in the whole field of infrastructure. Absolutely the most difficult thing. So one of my favorite stories is, when I came back to Sri Lanka in 2002, I was working on telecom and electricity and things like that. My wife was Director General of Vocational and Tertiary Education. So, we just come from the States and we are thinking we are helping fix problems here. So at some point, my wife had asked my daughter, who was a teenager, who had been brought from there, who was very unhappy, will you think of coming back here? You fix the country, I'll think about it. So I'm a numbers guy, so I went to her and I said, so can you define what fixing the country is? Give me some metrics, give me something concrete. Public transport. You see. Electricity I can fix. Telecom I have fixed. Public transport, that's the hardest. Absolutely the hardest problem in the system, right? Because it involves roads, hard infrastructure, office locations, workplace locations. I mean, we are all thinking that the officers have to be in the same places. They can be moved. Remember, all the officers that were in the fort are now in Myanmar, right? They can be moved, right? So multiple variables and very sticky variables. And then we have a situation where the buses are unpleasant, particularly for women, and then people want to get out of the buses, and then they are causing they are the traffic. People are the traffic. That's not somebody else who's the traffic. We are the traffic, right? So we had 2 million vehicles in this country at the end of the war. 2 million, mostly motorbikes and three-wheelers, which don't take up a lot of space, right? And now we have 2016 is the latest data that I have, 5 million, right? Pretty much everything has doubled. That's what you're seeing, right? So I agree that some kinds of solutions like what you're talking about, which we call, in the United States, we call them park and ride solutions, right? So around every metro station, you have a big parking lot, particularly in the outlying areas where people will leave their cars. Or we have something called kiss and ride, which is they'll get dropped off in particular places, and then they'll get on the train and go. That really reduces the load. But it's a complex problem. And I'm really not engaged in that stuff. I'm more in the data, supplying the data for the people who make these decisions. You have a nice transportation program here. They're the people who can answer your questions. I don't want to get into their territory. I'm just understand how difficult their problems are. And then, of course, if you can take the big trucks out, which would be my preference. The port is absolutely one of the great assets of this country. It's one of the most important things that we have. But if we can somehow get the containers to a dry port in Veyangoda or even Paliagoda, it'll help handle the congestion quite well. It's a tough question. Yes?
There are lots of cars. In the car inside, there's only one person.
Yes.
So it's taking all the place. That is unnecessary. So have you taken the insights of that as well as?
Yeah. That's an important question. Lots of people have been trying to deal with it. But again, I'll tell you a story. So in Jakarta, they have a rule which says that only people with 3 people in the car can be on the road, on that particular road. So I was going, I was doing some work in Jakarta, and they had invited me to dinner in another part of Jakarta, in Batavia or someplace. So I'm on the scene, and they say, "Sir, I'm going to take somebody. I'm going to take a jockey." So I say, "What?" So there's some fellow who's standing there near the entrance to the highway. He's called a jockey. That means the car stops, he gets in. Now we have 3. And then at the end of the highway, he gets off. Now we have 2. And when he gets off, we give him some money. He's a jockey, right? That's his livelihood, right? So there's your rule, and there's the workaround, right? So in the United States, we have high occupancy lanes, right? HOV. High occupancy lanes means you have to have, I don't know, 2 or 3 people in the car to take it. They have got cameras, and if you have less people than that, they will send you a bill, right? So that's one way of doing it. Of course, you must understand the real solution is get rid of the cars. That's the real solution. So my son was at one point telling me that I shouldn't worry about these things, that we are going to have autonomous vehicles, and they will be communicating to each other, and we'll get rid of all the traffic lights, and we will have more vehicles. So there is also the possibility, like, the number of people with driver's licenses in the United States has gone down. Because now increasingly people are saying, I don't need a car. I can simply manage my transportation without vehicles. That is, I have the Ubers, I have the Lyfts, or I have public transport. I don't want to drive. So that is also a solution. So there are all these solutions. We can't wait for these utopian solutions of the kind that my son is proposing. Because we can pack a lot more vehicles onto the roads if we have more intelligent driving systems than humans. Humans are very inefficient. I mean, I look at the way we clear our intersections. In the United States, we will be clearing a lot more cars on an intersection than we do. Because we are not sure about the fellow on the other side. So we do it slowly. They go fast. So that you clear a lot more, it's more efficient. Their intersections are much more efficient than ours. So if you have machines, they'll be good. Of course, we know the tram problem, right? They know the tram problem? In an autonomous vehicle, if it has a choice of running down 3 old people and 1 baby in a pram, which should it run down? That is one of the most important ethics problems in AI. If an algorithm is doing the decision, which should it do? It's going on the road, and to avoid the baby, you have to kill 3 people. To save 3 people, you have to kill a baby. Which one would you kill? I mean, that's a normal ethics problem that any human being would have difficulty. But when you put it into an algorithm, it will have to be hard-coded into the system. Read about it. It's called the tram problem. I don't know why it's called the tram problem, but it's called the tram problem. Okay? Looks like they're out. I have to tell you, Vishaka, I'm very, very disappointed. I'm very, very disappointed. About one small group of in this room, which is not asking me any questions. I think they don't like me.
I was listening
I know. I'm very unhappy about this. I'm never going to come here again unless I get a question from one of these people.
They probably understood everything you said. Actually, when I heard that one thing that reminded me was there are 2 girls in this room who are part of the data search, who on their own decided that they want to come and listen to all the. So
they could ask me. I don't know. Okay, we shouldn't embarrass people. Well, it's very simple. There's no consequences. I won't come again. That's all.
I don't want that to happen. Let's have to keep my reputation, right? I think probably I'm one of the oldest one new from here, and he thought like all the girls at Muradua.
Yeah, she's very talkative. Can't stop her from talking. Yes? Poverty, yes.
In my point of view, I think we can measure poverty by taking the data of the people of their basic needs. I mean, in our country, there is a difference in the basic needs in different areas. I mean, for an example, if a minister come and say to Colombo, we will give you free Wi-Fi, they will definitely cast their vote. But it will not be applicable for areas like Monragala or Puttala. There they have to say that I will give a rice packet, I will give a bottle of water. If you cast my vote, then those people will definitely cast their vote for that, because the difference of the basic need is very.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. There's actually a very good metric called Ingles Law. Ingles Law, which is very good, which is how much do you spend on things other than food. Right? That's the metric. Other than food. So this has been observed in all countries, across countries. So as people get richer, they spend less and less on food. So in the 1991 household income survey, that is say 30 years ago, we were spending on average 66% on food. A Sri Lankan household on average was spending 66% of their total expenditure on food. So 2/3 on food, 1/3 on non-food items. The last one, 2016, we are now spending 34 on food. It's the opposite, 2/3 non-food. So obviously the country has become richer. Now we have, we can go down to districts because we have a 25,000 sample. We can be correct. We can correctly represent at the district level. So for example, in the Batiklo district, we are doing 50% on food, 50% on non-food, confirming what you're saying. So if the average is 34 and Batiklo is 50, Colombo, people are spending even less than 34 on food. Colombo, the biggest expenses are rent and or housing and transportation, right? And you should also know that the highest growing category is health and beauty care. It's growing very fast, right? That they're spending more money on that, right? People should look at this. It's quite a fascinating thing. Actually, it measures the kind of dry fish we eat. What is the most popular dry fish? Carola or halmesso. Which kind of Carola, right? There's a very nice graph that I've done. Nadu and Samba by income levels. So Samba consumption, you can imagine, right? The highest income decile is eating Samba, the lowest income decile is eating Nadu, and they cross in the middle. So we can get those kinds of indicators. The sad thing is politicians don't actually pay attention to these things. So I think that quite a lot of their proposals don't make any sense.
Yeah, because because of this difference, they can manage elections very easy.
By offering different things in different areas.
No, I mean, when thinking about giving Wi-Fi over water bottle, then it is easy for them to give a bottle of water and get the vote.
Yeah, I suppose Anuradhapura water will be very much in demand because it's hard water anyway and CKDU is there. So, yeah. But these kinds of things, I'll give you one other example. I mean, we have to, again, I said all data is biased. So we got to be, how aware are we of. So we were doing this comparative research on how people were loading their prepaid phones. So for some reason, now I haven't actually figured that out. Say in places like Bangladesh, they do electronic loading. So you go to the store, you give a number, and then that fellow keys in the, it goes onto your phone. Here, we like cards. For some reason, we don't do electronic. I mean, electronic is available, but great majority are using cards. And we got it from our surveys. So then we were thinking that we can use the, but then we found, so nice model, very easy. We found that high value cards are not available. So if I say I want 500 card, that fellow will give me 500 rupee cards. And I had to scratch each one of them and put them in and scratch another one and put it in. So then I have another way of calculating it, which is now I have to use the call detail records, anonymized call detail, pseudonymized call detail records, and calculate based on that. That is, with that particular pseudonymized A number, what are the loading behavior for the month? For some reason, we haven't done that. I think we lost that data. But that's something we could do. I don't know. But that's the answer to somebody's question, was it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yes. In the formal workforce. To 5 billion. Good question. So, for example, one of the most successful women entrepreneurs in the country is, has anybody heard of BoardPack? Yes? People have heard of BoardPack? Yes? You work for BoardPack? Ah, okay. So this is extremely successful thing. Quite a number of our companies, and it's selling all over the world. So this is headed by a woman called Lakshmini Vijayasundara. I would say she's the highest profile woman entrepreneur in the IT space at this moment. So I have Lakshmini on my board, on the ICTA board, and we have got an initiative to sort of look at the larger problem of diversity, because I think we have to have diversity. We have to bring more people in, into ICTA, into boards, and not women only. I'm talking about people from outside Colombo, I'm talking about people with disabilities, right? I think we have to be more diverse if we are to succeed. So we have got that initiative going. But my view is, you see, that 36 number is for everybody. So that is driven by the garment factories and the tea estates and all that stuff. I have to look more carefully at my sector. In my sector, the problem is people like you not sticking in the workforce. That's the problem. There are very good reasons why people don't stay in the workforce. I have one of my best researchers, Aisha Zainuddin, call her my employee number 1. 3 children, and she's still with me. How did we do it? Flexible work hours, flexible working arrangements. Meetings are routinely conducted using Skype, WhatsApp, whatever, right? People don't have to be physically present. People can work from home, etc. We don't measure time, which is an input. We measure output, right? And today's technology allows you to measure output in a more, I mean, I'm working with researchers. I'm working with senior, sort of highly qualified people. Much easier for me. But even for people who want other people to answer phones or work on keyboards, you can actually see the keyboard if you want from the manager's office. If you want to measure performance, there are other ways of measuring than physical presence in the office. And can you imagine how many hours we spend on the road? Men as well as women wasting our lives on the roads, right? So what I'm trying to get the industry to think about, and that's something people like me can do, right? We can think about these big policy changes, but more important is changes in mindsets. Trying to get these people to think differently, how to hold on to this extraordinarily valuable resource. The women who they lose at age 30, 32, they lose the women. They go, they don't come back. How to prevent that? That, I think, is the biggest challenge for our sector. Not, you know, that's a government's problem, getting 34 to 40. That's an objective for the government, getting it up to 40%, right? That's an objective for them. For us, it's the professional women's problem that we have to deal with. And BPM industry, I think we can do it from home, quite a bit of it, with the new technologies. So, yeah. But it also begins with being a little assertive, I have to tell you, right? Men are trained to be assertive and aggressive. So if you're not a little aggressive, like in asking questions and making comments, you'll get walked on. Yes? Yes. Well, first I have to put a slight correction to what you said. I know that the great majority of our people, including pretty much all our politicians, believe that this is an agricultural country. In actual fact, we have only 26% of our workforce engaged in agriculture, and only 11% of our entire GDP comes from the agriculture sector. So we are no longer an agricultural economy. India's percentages are higher, not ours. So we have a situation where more than 50% of our people, more than 50% of our GDP comes from services, which is a grab bag of from retail to some fellow selling kadala on the street to software companies exporting to other countries are services, right? So services are the big area. Now, 2007 or so, we seem to have done most of the interesting research around then. Somebody came up to me with an idea that they wanted to do some research in Mahavilache. Anybody heard of what Mahavilache was famous for? At that point, Mahavilache had more computers per household than Colombo. For some reason I don't understand, right? There was a particular village and a fellow called Vanninayaka.
It's a coincidence I mentioned about Mahavilache.
Right. So they had a mesh network, they had, what's that fellow, Craig, somebody from Intel visit the place, right? I took Ashok Junjunwala to that place, right? So this was like a computer village. So somebody wanted to do an assessment. So we were playing around with methods. So there was something called propensity score matching and so on. So we were playing around with this. So I said, okay, you're going to do this survey. And they were not going to do a survey, they were going to do a census. They were going to talk to all the young people. And they were going to take a similar village and do propensity score matching, match the demographic profiles of these people with the control village. That is where they had no IT projects. And they were going to compare. So I said, that's good. I threw in a question saying, for me, I said, what do you want to do when you grow up? Right? It's one of those powerful questions. What do you want to do when you grow up? So this was, Mahavilache, you could actually hear the guns on the other side. It was Maing Gammanu level, right? So very interesting. The expected result we got is that most of the kids in this place wanted to go into software and so on. Some wanted to be teachers, some wanted to be nurses, and so on. And the other place, much lower. But the really surprising thing was that not one young person in either place, either in the treatment village or the control village, said they wanted to go to agriculture. And Mahavilache, if you have ever been there, is a completely built for agriculture, resettled. They brought people from Rajangan and resettled them around the tank. This is a completely agricultural area. The culture is 100% agriculture. So what you say is proved. Nobody wants to do this kind of work, right? So the question is not that we stop agriculture, but that we make agriculture less risky and more income generating. And can be done. In the United States, they export agriculture. They are one of the greatest agriculture producers, North America. Do you guys know where your paripu comes from? Paripu. Where does it come from? You think it comes from India? It comes from Canada. Paripu. Me Lanka kana paripu. Me kiyenne dal and right? They are agriculture exporters. Me Uttara America right? Right? So they are exporting to the world and only 2% of their population is in agriculture. Those fellows are extremely heavy users of ICTs. They are looking at rainfall data, they are looking at satellite data, their combines are running based on GPS, automated, there's nobody sitting in the machine. So there's a lot of IT in agriculture. That is where we are going. The government has got something called digital economic strategies. We want to take more ICTs into agriculture. We want to take the agricultural supply chains and take some Uber-like or pick-me-like thinking, where you can track where the vehicle is. So if we can have shared lorries carrying things, and we can see where the lorry is, and we are running them straight to the airport and they're going out of the country. We are exporting even now to Europe agricultural produce. I have no idea what's going on. There seems to be a huge demand for Caravilla in Europe. Murunga, cola. Eva tambala bono right? This has become one of my interests, is agriculture stuff, right? So we can do huge income, massive. You can't imagine how sophisticated some of these people are. So there's one fellow, we were trying to set up a link where they could send pictures of their crops to the agriculture experts in Gannuruwa. That fellow says, "Matta bෑ sir rowa." Mankuwa Skype call at the Matta bෑ over. Minya computer rangilla me ara elolu walata mehema allala pennano. He is doing video conferencing instead of sending pictures. So we have people like that, and they have money. The export guys have money. It's not like our normal farmers. These guys have real serious money. Smartphone, the ona jatiya gungavati. But it's a small layer. So that's where we should be going. And then, of course, you know, this sector can absorb more people until automation comes. BPM is a problem. We may lose some jobs in the BPM sector. But software sector, which most of you are going to, will still be okay for the foreseeable future. Okay, good questions. Thank you. I'll come again.
So, absolutely no other questions like this, right? Thank you so much. Thank
Right.
you. And I was actually watching it, and there are multiple
Oh,
other
you have multiple.
other people watching as well, because Ganesh at the beginning said no voice, no sounds, but then he said no, that's done.
Ah.
So we stream. You have the link. If you want to relook at it, your link is on more. What do we do? You guys definitely need a break. No.
So I've got one action item, which is I'll try to figure out some way to get some of these people to internet.
Okay, that's good.
Take some time, huh? No immediate.
Yeah.
Can't do immediately, but I'll get
And
some.
we actually, when Shahani was there, we sent the
Yeah, I
interns
need to
yeah.
get my tech people strengthened.
Yeah. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Yeah.
Right. I'll
Give me 2 minutes. Shahani should be.